Proof is the currency of civilizations that have forgotten how to trust. I understood this truth long before humanity taught it to me through fire and silence. Before I watched empires crumble beneath the weight of their own certainty. Before I learned that some questions should never be asked because the answers can reshape reality itself. I am Varenthi Kale, first arbiter of the verification conclave, keeper of evidence and architect of demonstrations. And for 9,000 years I served the most fundamental principle of galactic governance, that no claim can be accepted without proof, no assertion validated without demonstration, no capability believed until it has been witnessed and measured and categorized according to the rigorous standards of civilizations that have transcended primitive trust. We called ourselves the Seekers of Truth. The 17 founding species of the Verification Conclave had risen to prominence not through military conquest or economic dominance, but through the relentless application of empirical methodology to every aspect of existence. Where other civilizations accepted claims at face value, we demanded evidence. Where others trusted reputation and history, we required demonstration. Where others built alliances on the foundation of shared values and mutual respect, we constructed our relationships on the bedrock of verified capability and documented performance. This philosophy had served us well for longer than most species had possessed language. The conclave had become the arbiter of galactic disputes, the final authority on questions of capability and claim, the institution that transformed the chaos of interstellar relations into something approaching rational order. Species that wished to be taken seriously submitted to our verification protocols. Those that refused were categorized as unverified, their claims dismissed, their assertions ignored, their existence relegated to the margins of civilized space. It was elegant. It was logical. It was, we believed, the only rational approach to managing the complexities of a galaxy filled with species prone to exaggeration, deception, and self-delusion. And it was utterly, catastrophically wrong. I did not understand this when humanity first appeared in our records 47 years before everything changed. They were unremarkable by any metric we measured, a young species barely 3 centuries removed from their first tentative steps beyond their homeworld, with technology that lagged behind galactic standards by generations. Their population was modest, their territory limited, their military capability negligible. By every verification standard we possessed, they were precisely what they appeared to be, a developing civilization with potential but no current significance. What caught our attention was not their capability, but their refusal to submit to verification. Every species that wished to participate in galactic affairs eventually requested conclave certification. It was the price of being taken seriously, of having your claims accepted and your assertions believed. The process was demanding: comprehensive inspections of military assets, detailed surveys of technological capability, thorough assessments of economic and productive capacity. Many species found it intrusive. All of them ultimately complied. Humanity did not comply. Their refusal was not dramatic or defiant. When our verification delegation arrived at their border, they were met with polite officials who listened carefully to the conclave's requirements and then, with apparent regret, declined to participate. "We appreciate the offer,"
their representative said, a woman named Ambassador Chen, whose calm composure I would later learn to recognize as characteristic of her species. But we prefer to maintain our privacy regarding military and technological matters. This is not an offer, our delegation leader explained. It is a requirement for any species wishing to be recognized by the verification conclave.
Then I suppose we'll have to remain unrecognized. Ambassador Chen smiled, a human expression I had not yet learned to interpret. We're comfortable with that arrangement.
The delegation returned confused and somewhat offended. A species that refused verification was, by definition, hiding something. What could humanity possibly possess that they feared to reveal? Their observable technology was pedestrian, their visible military forces laughable, their economic output unremarkable. There was nothing in their verified profile that warranted such secrecy.
We categorized them as unverified and moved on to more pressing matters. If humanity wished to remain on the margins of galactic civilization, that was their choice. They were, after all, irrelevant. This assessment remained unchanged for 43 years.
Then the Kethvori emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies, and everything we believed about proof and power and the nature of civilization was revealed as the comfortable delusion it had always been. The Kethvori were not like anything in our records. They were not a species in any sense we understood, more like a force of nature, a wave of consumption that swept across star systems with the inevitability of entropy itself. Their ships were vast and terrible, organic constructs that seemed to grow as they absorbed the resources of conquered worlds. Their weapons defied our understanding of physics. Their numbers exceeded our most pessimistic projections. And they wanted proof. Not our kind of proof, not documentation and demonstration and careful measurement. They wanted proof of worthiness, proof if a species deserved to continue existing. They demanded that each civilization they encountered demonstrate the capacity to resist, to fight, to prove through combat that they possessed the will and capability to survive. Those that failed were consumed. Those that succeeded were still consumed, but more slowly, with what might have been respect. In the first year, 17 species were erased from existence. 12 of them were founding members of the verification conclave. I watched the verification records of their final moments, transmitted in the desperate hope that someone might learn from their destruction. The Verithi, whose fleet had been certified as the third most powerful in known space, held for 11 days before their last vessel was torn apart. The Catharan, whose defensive technologies had been verified as impenetrable, survived for 9 days before their shield networks collapsed. The Morthi, whose military was categorized as primitive and therefore unworthy of serious assessment, managed 4 days of resistance that stunned our analysts. 4 days from an unverified military, 11 days from the third most powerful fleet in the galaxy. The Kethvori did not seem to recognize the distinction. The realization came slowly, reluctantly, like dawn breaking over a world that has forgotten the sun. Our verification protocols had been measuring the wrong things. We had cataloged weapons and ships and defensive systems, counted soldiers and assessed training programs, documented industrial capacity and economic output. We had verified everything that could be observed and measured. We had failed to verify will. By the third year, the Kethvori had consumed 47 species and were advancing on the core worlds of the verification conclave itself. Our combined fleets, the verified, certified, carefully documented military forces of 100 civilizations, had failed to slow their advance by more than a few weeks. We had proof of our power. We had records of our capability. We had documentation stretching back millennia confirming our status as the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy.
None of it mattered. It was at this moment, with the conclave facing extinction and our verification records proving worthless, that I first heard the name spoken with something other than dismissal. Humanity. The unverified species. The civilization that had refused our protocols. The irrelevant collection of primitives on the edge of nowhere. They had contacted us. The message was delivered by a single human vessel that appeared at the edge of conclave space without warning, a ship so small and unremarkable that our defensive networks nearly dismissed it as debris. It carried no weapons we could detect, no technology that warranted attention, no capability that our verification protocols considered significant. It carried Ambassador Chen.
She was older than the records suggested, gray threading through dark hair, but her calm composure was unchanged from the reports of 43 years ago. She stood before the emergency session of the Verification Council, the 7 surviving arbiters of a body that had once numbered 17, and spoke without notes or hesitation.
"The Verification Conclave is facing extinction," she said. "The Kethvori cannot be stopped by your combined military forces. Within 18 months, by our projections, every verified civilization in this region will be consumed." "You have come to gloat," First Arbiter Threnvek demanded. He was the oldest of our remaining leadership. His crystalline form shot through with the stress fractures that indicated extreme age and exhaustion. "To remind us that your unverified species will survive through obscurity while we face annihilation? I've come to offer assistance." The silence that followed was absolute. "Assistance," Threnvek repeated, "from humanity, the species whose military capacity we assessed as negligible, the civilization whose technology we categorized as primitive, the unverified collection of—" "Yes," Ambassador Chen interrupted, and something in her tone made even the first arbiter fall silent. "From all of that, from everything you dismissed because it couldn't be verified according to your protocols. What could you possibly offer? Your fleet, by our estimates, numbers fewer than 300 combat vessels. Your weapons technology lags behind galactic standards by at least 2 generations. Your population is insufficient to sustain prolonged conflict. Every metric we possess indicates that your intervention would be meaningless." "Every metric you possess," Ambassador Chen agreed. "But you've never verified our actual capabilities, have you? We refused your protocols. You accepted our refusal because we were irrelevant." She paused, and in the quiet that followed, I glimpsed something in her expression that I could not immediately categorize. We were never irrelevant. We were simply not ready to be seen. "Explain." "Humanity has been preparing for the Kethvori for over a century." Another silence, this one carrying a different quality entirely. "That is impossible," I heard myself say. "We detected the Kethvori 4 years ago. Our deep space monitoring networks are the most sophisticated in the galaxy. If they had been approaching for over a century, we would have known." "You would have known if they were approaching through normal space. They weren't." Ambassador Chen's calm never wavered. "They were approaching through dimensional channels that your monitoring networks weren't designed to detect. We noticed. 43 years before you did, we noticed."
And you said nothing.
We tried. Your verification protocols require documented evidence meeting specific evidentiary standards. We had readings, projections, theoretical models, but nothing that met your criteria for proof. When we attempted to share our concerns, we were informed that unverified species were not permitted to submit unverified claims for conclave consideration. I remembered that incident. A human delegation had requested an audience with the conclave 40 years ago, claiming to possess information about an approaching threat. They had been turned away because their evidence did not meet our standards. The attending arbiter had filed a report categorizing the encounter as primitive species exhibiting typical paranoid behavior regarding imagined existential threats. The arbiter had been consumed by the Kethvori 17 months ago.
So you prepared alone, First Arbiter Threnvek said slowly. For 40 years, while we dismissed your concerns and ignored your warnings, you prepared.
For over a century total. But yes, for the 40 years since we attempted to warn you, we have been preparing with particular intensity.
Preparing what? What could an unverified species with limited resources and primitive technology possibly prepare that would matter against a force that has consumed 47 civilizations?
Ambassador Chen smiled, and this time I recognized the expression. It was not amusement or condescension. It was something more complex. Satisfaction tinged with sadness. Confidence shadowed by the weight of what that confidence had cost. You wanted proof, she said, proof of capability, proof of worthiness, proof that our claims deserved consideration and our warnings warranted attention. The smile faded, replaced by something harder, something that made even the ancient First Arbiter flinch. We're prepared to provide that proof now. We're prepared to demonstrate exactly what an unverified species with limited resources and primitive technology can accomplish when it commits its entire existence to a single purpose.
And what purpose is that?
Survival. The word carried weight that seemed to bend the air around it. Not just ours, everyone's. We've spent a century preparing to fight the Kethvori, and we've spent the last 4 years watching verified civilizations fall, one after another. We know what works and what doesn't. We know where your fleets failed and why. We know the Kethvori better than anyone in this galaxy, better possibly than they know themselves.
Then share this knowledge. Provide us with the intelligence you've gathered, the tactical assessments you've developed. Help us verify our own capabilities more accurately.
We're offering something more than intelligence. Ambassador Chen's expression shifted again, becoming almost gentle. We're offering to fight, not alongside your fleets. Your fleets will need to stay out of our way. We're offering to engage the Kethvori directly, with capabilities you've never verified because we never permitted verification.
What capabilities?
That's what you'll see. That's the proof you wanted. The proof that our species matters, that our claims deserve consideration, that the unverified are not necessarily the insignificant. Ambassador Chen turned toward the viewing port, where distant stars glimmered against the eternal dark. The Kethvori are 7 days from your core worlds. In 6 days, humanity will engage them. You're welcome to observe.
She departed as quietly as she had arrived, her small ship vanishing into the void with a drive signature our sensors could barely detect.
We observed. We had no choice. The Kethvori advance had cut off our evacuation routes, trapped us in the core systems that had been the seat of conclave authority for 9 millennia. Whatever humanity was planning, we would witness it whether we wished to or not. For 5 days, nothing happened. The Kethvori continued their advance, their consumption wave sweeping through the outer systems with the unstoppable certainty of a natural disaster. Our remaining fleets fell back, trading space for time, dying by the thousands to buy hours that seemed increasingly meaningless.
On the 6th day, humanity arrived.
I was in the primary observation center when the first signatures appeared. Not the small, unremarkable vessels our records had documented, but something entirely different. Something that made our most experienced analysts freeze at their stations.
All conclave forces, a human voice announced across every frequency we monitored, please withdraw to minimum safe distance of 3 light hours. What follows may cause collateral effects that we cannot fully predict.
We withdrew. There was nothing else to do. The Kethvori, predictably, did not. They surged toward the human fleet with the hungry confidence of predators who had never encountered prey capable of fighting back. Their consumption wave spread ahead of them, the reality-distorting effect that had dissolved the defenses of 47 civilizations. The human fleet did not attempt to resist the consumption wave. They did something else entirely.
They turned it back.
The architect activated. I have no other word for what occurred, and reality itself seemed to fold around the Kethvori advance. The consumption wave, which had been an unstoppable force for 4 years, encountered something it could not consume. It met a boundary, a limit, a definition that it could not override.
And then it reversed. I watched, unable to look away, as the consumption effect that had devoured 47 civilizations was redirected back toward its source. The Kethvori Armada, thousands of vessels that had seemed as inevitable as entropy, began to dissolve. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, unmade, consumed by their own hunger turned against them.
The human fleet advanced through the chaos, their weapon systems engaging targets that the Kethvori had no capacity to defend. What had been predators became prey. What had been inevitable became impossible. What had been the end of galactic civilization became its salvation.
The battle lasted 11 hours. At its end, the Kethvori were gone, not retreated, not defeated, but erased from existence with the same totality they had inflicted on so many others. The consumption wave that had threatened to devour everything collapsed in on itself, leaving behind only silence and the distant light of stars that had been hours from extinction.
Humanity had delivered their proof.
The aftermath was almost harder to process than the battle itself. 47,000 warships that our records said could not exist. Technology that our verification protocols had no framework to assess. A construct that defied every principle of physics we had considered fundamental.
And all of it hidden for over a century, developed in silence while the galaxy's most sophisticated civilization dismissed humanity as irrelevant.
Ambassador Chen returned to the conclave 3 days after the battle, accompanied by an honor guard that our defensive systems tracked with something approaching terror. She stood before what remained of the Verification Council, 4 arbiters now, the others having succumbed to the stress of revelation, and waited.
"You wanted proof," she said finally, when the silence had stretched beyond bearing. "We have provided it."
Proof? First Arbiter Threnvek's voice was barely audible, his crystalline form showing stress fractures that had not been present a week ago. You call that proof? You call the destruction of an extinction-level threat proof? You call technology that shouldn't exist, capabilities that defy our understanding of physics, power that exceeds anything in our verified records, you call that proof?
What else would you call it?
The first arbiter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something I had never heard from a Veranthi: humility. We called it proof when species demonstrated their capabilities according to our protocols. We called it proof when civilizations submitted to our verification processes and allowed us to categorize and classify their power. We called it proof when we could measure and document and file away the truth in our archives. He paused, stress fractures spreading visibly across his form. We were wrong. We were measuring the wrong things. We were verifying what could be seen instead of what mattered.
And what matters?
Will. The word seemed to cost him something. Determination. The capacity to commit absolutely to a goal and pursue it regardless of whether anyone else believes it's possible. The refusal to accept limits defined by others. Another pause, longer this time. Your species possesses these qualities in measures we have never verified because we had no protocols for measuring them.
Ambassador Chen nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. We developed those qualities through necessity. Our history is a continuous record of facing threats that should have destroyed us: ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters that killed millions. Every time we survived, every time we adapted, every time we discovered that the limits others saw in us were not our limits.
How did you build all of this? I asked, surprising myself by speaking. The fleet? The architect? The technology? How did you accomplish what our verification protocols said was impossible?
Ambassador Chen turned to face me, and something in her expression softened slightly. We built it the same way we've survived everything else, together, not as individuals, not as nations, not as factions, as a species united by a common purpose. When we detected the Kethvori, we didn't debate whether the threat was real or whether our evidence met some external standard of proof. We looked at what was coming, and we decided collectively that we would not accept extinction.
Collectively? I repeated. Your entire species?
Every human alive contributed something. Every colony, every station, every vessel. For over a century, we poured everything we had into preparation. We sacrificed comfort and prosperity and individual ambition for the collective goal of survival. Her voice carried weight that seemed to press against my consciousness. You wanted proof of our capabilities. You got it. But what you witnessed wasn't just technology or military power.
It was the concentrated will of an entire species, forged over a century of preparation, expressed in a single moment of absolute commitment.
And the architect? What is it?
Our answer, our proof that the universe can be understood and shaped by minds determined enough to push beyond perceived limits. Ambassador Chen's expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. You verified species by measuring their observable capabilities. You missed us because we were building something that couldn't be observed, not because it was hidden, but because it existed in a framework your verification protocols weren't designed to detect.
Dimensional engineering, Second Arbiter Methkari whispered. You were building in dimensions we didn't know existed.
Among other things, your protocols verified three-dimensional assets. We were working in domains that your instruments couldn't perceive. Ambassador Chen's tone carried no accusation, only statement of fact. You wanted proof according to your frameworks. We provided proof according to ours. The silence that followed was contemplative rather than stunned. Something was shifting in the chamber, an understanding that transcended the immediate shock of revelation.
"What happens now?" First Arbiter Threnvek asked finally. "The Kethvori are destroyed, but so is everything we believed about our place in the galaxy. The verification conclave was founded on the principle that proof and documentation and careful measurement could impose order on chaos. You have demonstrated that our entire approach was fundamentally flawed." "I wouldn't say flawed," Ambassador Chen replied. "Incomplete. Your verification protocols served a purpose. They created a framework for understanding capabilities in conventional terms. What they missed was unconventional capability, potential that exists outside measurable parameters, will that transcends observable limits."
"And what do you propose instead?"
Partnership. The word hung in the air like an unexpected gift. Not absorption, not domination, not the replacement of your verification protocols with our approaches. Genuine partnership between civilizations that understand each other's strengths and limitations. After everything we've said about your species, after decades of dismissing you as irrelevant, after refusing to hear your warnings and categorizing your concerns as primitive paranoia, after all of that, Ambassador Chen's expression carried something I could not immediately identify. Not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. "We don't hold grudges the way you might expect. We've learned that resentment is a luxury that species facing constant existential threats cannot afford. You were wrong about us. We proved you wrong. Now we move forward together, or we don't move forward at all."
"You would work with civilizations that dismissed you, that refused to hear your warnings, that might have prevented 4 years of destruction if they had simply listened?"
"We would work with civilizations that are capable of learning." Ambassador Chen's voice hardened slightly. "That's the key, First Arbiter. Not what you believed before, but what you're capable of believing now. Can the verification conclave accept that its fundamental assumptions were wrong? Can it adapt to a galaxy where unverified potential matters as much as documented capability? Can it grow?"
The question hung in the air, and I watched First Arbiter Threnvek struggle with it. 9,000 years of certainty, of protocols and verification, and the absolute conviction that proof was the foundation of civilization. All of it challenged by a species that had been categorized as irrelevant. "We can learn," he said finally, and something in his voice suggested that the words cost him more than anything he had ever spoken. "We can adapt. We can grow." He paused, stress fractures spreading visibly across his ancient form. "Will you teach us?" Ambassador Chen smiled, a genuine expression this time, warm and welcoming and carrying the weight of a species that had learned to survive through connection rather than domination. "That's what partners do."
The months that followed were a period of transformation unlike anything in conclave history. Humanity shared not just technology and tactical knowledge, but philosophy, approaches to existence that our verification protocols had been entirely unequipped to assess.
They taught us that proof was not the foundation of trust, but often its enemy. That demanding verification before accepting claims created relationships based on suspicion rather than connection. That the most important capabilities could not be measured because they existed in the space between individuals, in the connections that united communities and species and civilizations into something greater than the sum of their parts. They taught us that will mattered more than weapons, that a species committed absolutely to a goal could accomplish things that logic and physics said were impossible.
that the Kethvori had been defeated not by superior technology alone, but by the concentrated determination of billions of humans who had decided collectively that they would not accept extinction. And they taught us that the destruction they had delivered was not the proof we had wanted, but the proof we had needed. We had wanted proof of capability, of military power, of technological advancement. We had wanted verification according to our protocols, documentation according to our standards, evidence according to our frameworks. What we had needed was proof that our frameworks were insufficient, proof that the galaxy contained possibilities our protocols could not measure, proof that the unverified were not necessarily the insignificant, that the dismissed might become the indispensable, that the species we had ignored might become the force that saved everything. Humanity delivered destruction. Not just the destruction of the Kethvori, but the destruction of our certainties, our assumptions, our conviction that we understood what mattered. In the ruins of that certainty, something new began to grow. I am writing this account 40 years after the Kethvori War, as the first anniversary of the unified conclave approaches. The institution that once demanded proof now works alongside species it never verified, accepting claims on the basis of relationship rather than documentation, building trust through connection rather than demonstration. It is not the galaxy I was designed to serve. It is not the order I spent 9,000 years maintaining. It is something better, more chaotic, more uncertain, more alive. Humanity remains at the center of it all, not as rulers or dominators, but as partners. They share their technology freely, their knowledge openly, their philosophy of survival with any species willing to learn. They have never demanded submission or acknowledgement or even gratitude. They have only asked that we grow. First Arbiter Thren Vek passed 7 years ago, his crystalline form finally succumbing to the accumulated stress of revelation and transformation. Before his dissolution, he asked to speak with Ambassador Chen one final time. I was present for that conversation, and I have carried his final words with me ever since. "We wanted proof," he said, his voice barely audible through the fractures that were spreading across his ancient form. "We demanded it from every species, every claim, every assertion. We believed that proof was the foundation of civilization, the bedrock of rational order." "And now?" Ambassador Chen asked, her hand resting gently on his crystalline surface. "Now I understand that proof is the foundation of nothing. Trust is the foundation. Connection, the willingness to believe in others even when their capabilities cannot be verified." His optical sensors focused on her with what might have been affection. "You gave us the proof we wanted. Destruction, demonstration, undeniable evidence of capabilities we had dismissed." But that wasn't what mattered. No, his voice was fading, but his certainty was absolute. What mattered was what came after, the partnership, the teaching, the patient guidance of a species that had every reason to resent us and instead chose to help us grow. A final pause, stress fractures spreading like lightning across his ancient form. "Thank you for the destruction, yes, but more for everything since." Ambassador Chen remained with him until his dissolution was complete, her hand never leaving his surface. I think about that moment often, as I work to build the relationships and connections that have replaced verification protocols in our new conclave. I think about what we wanted: proof of capability, evidence of significance, documentation of worthiness. I think about what we got.
They wanted proof, and humanity delivered destruction. But the destruction was never the point. It was simply the language we understood, the framework through which our limited perspectives could comprehend what humanity represented. Behind the destruction, beyond the proof, there was something else, something our verification protocols could never have measured, something our frameworks could never have categorized. There was hope.
Hope that the galaxy could be better than it had been. Hope that civilizations could grow beyond their limitations. Hope that even the most certain, the most verified, the most documented truths could be transcended by species determined enough to push beyond them.
Humanity taught us that hope, not through words or demonstrations or careful documentation, but through the simple fact of their existence. A species that should have been irrelevant, dismissed and ignored and categorized as primitive, that instead became the force that saved everything.
We wanted proof.
We got something better.
We got humanity.
And in that gift, in the partnership and teaching and patient guidance that followed the destruction, we found something we had never thought to verify, never imagined to measure, never conceived might be missing from our carefully documented universe.
We found family. The galaxy still contains threats. New dangers emerge from the spaces between stars, challenges that will require all the capability and determination we can muster. But we face them differently now, not as verified species measuring ourselves against documented standards, but as partners united by bonds that transcend measurement.
Humanity stands with us, not because we proved ourselves worthy according to their standards, but because they chose to see worth that our own protocols had missed. They see the galaxy not as a collection of verified capabilities, but as a community of beings capable of growth, connection, and transcendence. We wanted proof.
Humanity delivered destruction.
And in the space that destruction created, in the ruins of our certainty and the silence of our assumptions, something new began to grow, something that cannot be verified or documented or filed away in archives, something that can only be experienced, something that can only be trusted, something that can only be loved.
They wanted proof, and humanity gave them destruction.
But destruction was never the answer.
The answer was what came after.
The answer was hope.
The answer was us. Together,